Good evening, everyone, both here on our campus and on streaming as well. And welcome to this month's edition of the Better Business, Better Society seminars here at Aalto University School of Business. Today's seminar is a little bit different from the usual. I hope you're not terribly disappointed, but I'm not going to give you the school update that I usually give at the beginning, because we actually have two deans here on stage, as you can see, and we're going to be talking about creativity today. We have a loaded program, so we save some time by skipping my update, and you get two of them next time, okay? So welcome to the School of Business, and I guess I'll pass over to Tuomas, my colleague.
Thank you, Timo. I'm Tuomas Auvinen, the Dean for the School of Arts, Design and Architecture, and this is, even though hosted by BIS, collaboration between our two schools, and you will hear from the speakers from our side as well. I also have the hat of champion of radical creativity for the whole Aalto community, and that's the coolest title I've ever had, so I tend to mention that every time. Radical creativity is part of Aalto strategy, one of our three strategic themes in conjunction with sustainable solutions and entrepreneurial mindset. And on my behalf, also welcome our online viewers and international VIP guests online as well.
I've often said that this multidisciplinarity is actually what attracted me when I came to Aalto about 6 years ago. I think connections between School of Business and both technology and creativity create competitive advantages for our school, and they're very important for our students as they're preparing for their working lives. So we are blessed to have a world top School of Design and Art right next door to us. And we're going to be talking much, or our experts will be talking a lot about the connections between the two fields and the potential that we have in those. I think, even though I don't view myself as a horribly creative person, I see the big potential that we have in combining these two fields.
Aalto has chosen radical creativity as one of the strategic areas, and I'm happy to tell that on top of the collaboration that we have, because we are in the same building between BIS and Arts, we also have now a Aalto Center for Radical Creativity that was just established a few weeks ago, and we will be actually working on the university level, helping both education, research, and impact build on creativity throughout the whole university, and we hope to engage many of you in the work as well, because we want to have impact in the society, and therefore many of the alumni and the companies that are in our community that we hope that we get to work with you in the future.
We talk in this country a lot about growth these days. And since we are at the leading Finnish business school, we must have a role in getting this country on the growth track back again after, 17, 18 years and counting. And I personally see this creativity as an input to our business management and leadership in this country as very crucial, and that just highlights the importance of collaborating across the fields. And I also think that at Aalto we have a unique opportunity, first of all because Aalto was founded on the premise of multidisciplinarity, and therefore it's part of our ethos. If we go to an old established university where these two departments might have existed for 100 years, it is somehow much harder to generate these collaborative ideas. But for us, it's the reason of existence. So it in its own way makes it easier to build bridges across our disciplines. So let me ask you, Tuomas, what has been the most crucial finding for you about creativity?
Well, maybe the most crucial message that I want to tell everyone here today, and this is what I keep repeating, is that in this changing world that we are living in today, with the big challenges that we have globally, as Finland looking for growth, etc., creativity is becoming one of the key work-life skills that we need to nurture and have. And despite of what Timo always says, we are all creative, even business school deans. So creativity is something that is inherent in all human beings, not just in the arts and design experts on that side of the building, but in every one of us. And therefore it's becoming more and more crucial to harness that creativity and lead for that creativity. And we will be hearing about that later today, hopefully from Eeva Vilkkumaa. And the most important things that I've gained over the last months here in Aalto is that I have been talking about the importance of creativity for about 20 years, also in the business sector, in Aalto executive education programs, etc. But now we actually published research findings where we can link creativity to the business performance of companies, and I'm certain we will hear more about that later today. How about you, Timo? What has been the most surprising or most important finding for you in creativity?
I must say, I need to thank Tuomas and his staff and faculty for pushing this radical creativity outside the School of Art and Design. I'm a finance professor by trade, and I guess I'm not the only one in this building who thinks that, okay, creativity doesn't concern us. You know, it took a while for me to actually realize that creativity is not something that just hangs on the wall or is performed on the stage. Actually, if you're a scientist, by default, you create something new. You know, you advance your own specialty field, and it always takes creativity. You cannot do the same thing that everybody else has done. That's not pushing science forward. So in that sense, it has been kind of, you know, I'm a slow learner, but I finally figured it out. Yes, creativity is really not only a nice to have, but actually a necessary item in any university research.
Absolutely, and I'm really happy that we are now here in the School of Business talking about creativity. When we started pushing the radical creativity thinking at Aalto University, I wouldn't even dream about this. But tonight is really the BIS inviting the creativity discussion to the business school. So thank you for the invitation, Timo.
Of course, happy to have this seminar and happy to have you as our nice neighbors also. Next time, looking forward to learning more about creativity in business, and I'll welcome on stage our host on the seminar, Riikka Mäkikoskela, please. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Timo and Tuomas. Thank you also all of you who have joined us today, here in the auditorium and also online. It is great to see so many of you here tonight. Good evening also on my behalf. My name is Riikka Mäkikoskela, and I work here at Aalto University for radical creativity. And I have, for example, acted as the project manager for the Creative Leap research project that you will hear more soon. We have a fantastic lineup of speakers tonight as we highlight the importance of creativity in today's business from many different perspectives. We will start with some academic viewpoints. Our first speaker is Astrid Huopalainen, Assistant Professor of Leadership for Creativity at the School of Business and the School of Arts, Design and Architecture. She will explore what creativity can mean in organizations and businesses. Welcome to the stage, Astrid.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Riikka, for the kind introduction, and really nice to be here and very nice to meet all of you. So I'm really kind of embodying this trans and cross-disciplinarity of Aalto on this position that is shared between two schools, and that has been a fantastic learning opportunity for me as well. So my own background is in management studies, but I get to work with students in the School of Art and Design as well. So that is kind of really a privileged place to be in. And what we will do now in the following 15 minutes or so is really kind of unpack the notion of creativity. Think about it. What kind of values and norms are underlying our understandings of creativity? What is the kind of historical background a bit in how creativity has entered the realm of business? And also, why is creativity so relevant for all businesses today? So, of course, some of the starting points that we might want to have is that creativity is a hugely transformative force. It's a world-making force in the sense that it's really kind of at the very heart of what it is to be human. It is at the essence of humanity. Creation is something that defines us as humans, whether that is in the domain of art or design, or in business and innovations and entrepreneurship. So it can be sort of explored from the various kind of mundane examples of solving problems with your neighbor or kind of solving a small issue in your company to being creative while you interpret your recipe and you cook something, to really the big inventions that we think about as scientists as we kind of try to establish novel and new knowledge that hasn't been there before. So it spans a whole kind of variety of fields, from the very small and from the very mundane to the radically transformative, to what Aalto University speaks about when we talk about radical creativity as something that breaks paradigms, that changes the way people work, think, and operate, for instance. However, theoretically, creativity has been quite slippery as a concept. It's not very easy to define. It kind of escapes our definitions very easily, and it has been present in a wide variety of research fields. So, of course, it's very present in art and design. It's also very present in psychology. That's also where there are firm creativity research roots. But it's also very present in education and human geography and urban studies and, of course, management studies today as well. Not to forget about entrepreneurship research. And for those of you who are into entrepreneurship, you are probably familiar with the Austrian economist Joseph Schumpeter, who talked about creative destruction, kind of bringing something novel to the market, something that radically breaks the existing order and kind of introduces something that wasn't there before. So there's an example of kind of the connections as well. But if we look at so this kind of creative destruction literature was happening and developed in the 1910s and up to the 1940s. But then we've also seen another big boost in creativity sort of discourse on a global level, and that happened around the millennia. That was when the notion of the creative economy became really, really powerful. And that was all about kind of thinking about value creation as ideas, as imagination, as intellectual property, rather than traditional products, so to speak. And some of these controversial thinkers like John Hawkins and Richard Florida spoke about the creative class, the specific knowledge workers that create value in a different way by kind of bringing in the expertise from the arts, for instance, and design, and in this way transforming businesses. So the creativity discourse has been there for a long time already, and it is not something very new in that sense. Also, if we look at the field of management studies and organization studies, we can see that all the way from the 1980s, for instance, when there was a post-modern turn, there's been an interest in questions around symbolism and aesthetics in embodiment at work, and those have been kind of a little odd to the normal sort of business field. But it's all about looking at sort of the creation of experiences, the creation of aesthetic value as part of the business value, and it's always already there. So there's also kind of in the beginning of the 2000s, there was a huge interest in, for instance, in management studies, in looking at leadership in creative organizations. What could management studies, for instance, learn from operas, or what could management studies learn from theaters or other kind of creative settings? So this has been quite interesting. But if we now zoom in on some of the very common definitions in the business field and the business context on how to grasp creativity, how do we make sense of this notion that is so slippery in many ways? So one of the kind of classical definitions is provided by Professor Emerita Theresa Amabile, who was active in Harvard Business School. And she emphasized the generation of something new, something useful, and something valuable. If it is a product, it can be a process, it can be an idea. But these three elements kind of need to be there. So there's the focus on novelty. It is something that was not there before. It didn't exist before. It is new in that sense. It is useful. It fills a function for someone, for shareholders, or it's useful for customers or stakeholders of different kind. And it's also valuable. It brings additional value. So in the first definition, the focus is very much on the creation as a process from the individual perspective. So this is the individual creating kind of something. But the shift has become sort of to look at the collective, because we know that organizations are collectives of teams of different people working together. So we need to understand the dynamics of value creation where there's lots of people involved. And that's the difficult part, because there's always different positionalities, different power elements, different sort of hierarchies in place. So how do we understand value creation in that sense? So many also think about creativity as this first process in the innovation process. So if innovation is all about commercializing creativity, making sure that it brings commercial value, then creativity would be the kind of idea generation behind it. But then again, of course, in innovation today, you have to be creative all the time. You have to kind of go back and forth and iterate. So the innovation process is also not very linear in that sense. And if we now try to look at the management and organization studies perspectives on creativity, the first emphasis was really on the individual perspective. And that is kind of the idea that creativity is an individual trait, and organizations should kind of try to recruit creative beings or creative professionals of different kind, and that those bring some value. But here we, of course, can see that this is perhaps a bit of an old-fashioned view today. So creativity doesn't just sort of belong to the individual, it happens in the encounters at work when different people are working together. So the focus is shifting towards the organizational approach. And that's really about the contextual factors that are always at play. So how is kind of creativity really happening in practice when there's always lots of people involved? And then if we look at the multi-level perspective, then it becomes this ongoing interaction between the individual level, between the team level, and also the more complex societal level as well. And looking at the everyday aspects of creativity, we tend to mystify it quite often, thinking about it as some kind of romantic, heroic act in a way. And there is something kind of problematic of that, because creativity happens all the time in the workplace, in mundane encounters. And that is something that me and my team have looked at in the research project that you will hear about as well, the Creative Leap. So how do we understand this kind of mundane creation that happens in the interactions, in teams, in the workplace, but also often outside of the workplace? So as a relational process, creativity also draws on much more than just the people. It's also about the tools, the resources we have at hand. It's also about the spaces. It's also about the trust that is built. It's also about atmospheres. And all of this plays out. So all of this matters. And this is why we need a better understanding of all these kind of elements that really play out in the process. And this also connects to the aspect of leadership. So if we know that creativity is all about value creation, about an openness to the world, about bringing something that wasn't there before, about curiosity, and also about courage to act in the market and to be a step ahead than the competitors, then we need to lead for it. So we need to build cultures where there is leadership that supports and makes this happen. And that is why leadership becomes such an important element. And key questions for leadership becomes this kind of resourcing. So how do we resource for creativity? How do we cater for the different needs that the teams might have? How do we make sure that people have a psychologically safe environment to create in? This is also not always in place. How do we make sure that they feel that they kind of want to bring their intrinsic much motivation to work to serve the company genuinely? So do we need to have rewards in place, for instance? We often hear today that people say that they're too busy, there's too much to do, I don't have the time to think, and I don't have the time to be creative. So then we need to look at the basics. Are people having the right amount of work to do? Are they doing the right things? How can we support them in order to come up with those bold ideas? And sometimes, the bold ideas are also kind of not welcomed, because what is true about creativity is that it can be quite disruptive. We bring something that can sound silly because kind of what we introduce hasn't been there before. So there isn't a frame of reference where we can place these ideas. So how do we do with that? So that's also something to be dealt with. How do we create these kind of spaces? And there's also, of course, research shows that creativity also needs boundaries. We need kind of processes and structures in place. We're good when we have some kind of deadlines. We can't be as creative as sort of without any boundaries. So what becomes the right kind of amount of agency and structure? How do you kind of create within the boundaries that you have? And also, how do we identify the different barriers that really are there and kind of hinder creativity from happening? So these might be interesting questions. So as key takeaways at this point is really that creativity serves as this kind of transformative driving force in organizations, in teams, in businesses, because creativity is all about ideas, new ideas, the generation of ideas, but then also what we do with those ideas, which are the ones we bring forward, which are the ones we drop because they're not novel, they're not profitable, and they're not sustainable. So this is something we need to think about. And what are the norms that shape how people behave at work? And what is it that kind of makes some ideas valued, whose ideas are valued, whose perspectives are heard? And is there a risk that we don't hear all the voices in the organization? So I would like to see creativity as everybody's business. It's really up to everyone to make sure that we kind of feed into this generation of novelty and growth. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Astrid, for your inspiring talk. What a task she had tonight. What is creativity? That slippery thing. At this point, I would like to remind you of the Q&A session that we have at the end of the program. So hold on. You will have the possibility to ask questions and also address comments to our speakers. We will next dive deeper into the business of creativity. I would like to invite Eeva Vilkkumaa on stage. She acts as the Associate Professor of Management Science at the School of Business and presents how the economic impact of creativity can be formed. Welcome to the stage, Eeva.
Thank you very much, Riikka. Hi, everyone. Very nice to see so many of you here. And I heard there are plenty of people online as well, so very nice to kind of see you there as well. Thank you, Astrid, for the great introduction. So it's easy for me now to move on from this because you've taken care of the hard part of introducing the notion of creativity. So I will be talking about our project that people have already kind of alluded to. So it was a Creative Leap, Creativity as a Competitive Advantage in Business. And this was a co-research project with Business Finland. And it was also funded by Next Generation EU. And we had a great bunch of people involved in this. So we had people from arts and the business school. So Astrid, Riikka, Tuomas were all involved and their teams as well. And then we also had Yellow Method, which is a consultancy, and played a key role here as well. So we did this kind of multi-method approach. So we had surveys, the purpose of which was to measure individual and organizational creativity in our partner organizations, which in fact included many big Finnish companies such as Kemira and Raisio, Marimekko, Fiskars, Posti, Vero and Sitra. I remembered them all. Now I can pat myself in the back. So we had those surveys. Then we also had interviews. We had in-depth interviews to get a little bit more sort of qualitative information. We also had ethnographic fieldwork by Astrid and her team to really kind of see the everyday processes of creativity at work. And then we had this data-driven approach to study the associations between creativity and this financial impact. And this is the part that I will be focusing on. So if you have more questions about the ethnographic field studies or things like this, then you can ask Astrid. But before I go there, I need to explain something about the survey, because this survey data is the input data for our data-driven approach. So this was a method developed by Susanna Rahkamo, who is now one of the founders of Yellow Method. So it's a validated survey method to explore individuals' potential for creativity. So we have 5 different elements here, or categories of creativity. So we have drive, we have curiosity, identity, insightfulness, and confidence. And then we had basically 10 questions for each category, 5 of which were kind of related to amplifiers of individual creativity, and 5 of which were always related to interference. So if there's something interfering your creative potential, then that was measured as well. And then we also had sort of similar type of framework for measuring organizational creativity. So now taking into account the 2 perspectives that Astrid already discussed, so this individual level perspective as well as the organizational level perspective. And here we also had 5 different categories. We had leadership for creativity there in the middle, and that included elements such as management behavior, trust, resource allocation for innovation, strategic planning and action, and future casting. And then we had other stuff like atmosphere, organization of work, interaction, creative execution. I'll highlight also this atmosphere one, so it includes things like culture of sharing, psychological safety, risk tolerance and courage, meaningfulness of work, as well as comfort. So here we also, for each of these 5 small elements, we looked at both amplifiers of these things and then interferers as well. So this is the survey data, and this survey was sort of carried out in all of the partnering organizations by hundreds and hundreds of people. And we also, luckily, for the data-driven purposes, had data from a previous project called Creative Working Life 2030. So we had altogether 17 organizations that we could look at to get a bit of a bigger sample size. So what we were set out to do was to create this framework through which we could actually study the impact of creativity on a company's financial performance. And financial performance can, of course, be measured in different ways. And here we focused on basically profitability measured by EBITDA margin. And this was now relative to the industry average, because if you carefully listen to what I said before, we had companies from very different domains and industries. So it's really difficult to compare them, with one another. So we were kind of looking at how well they perform in relation to the industry average. And then, so we were kind of able to have this 0, 1, or 2 category dependent variable. So whether you're overperforming the industry average or underperforming it. And then as independent variables, we had the survey data, and that was on the category level. So the big circles or bubbles in the figures were our independent variables. And we tried 3 different approaches. So we had this clustering analysis first, then we did a correlation analysis, and then finally a decision tree. And now I will tell you the results. So this is the clustering analysis, and some of you may think about something else when I say the word clustering analysis, but here we kind of use clustering analysis to categorize these companies into 4 different groups or clusters. So whether they were performing better than average in terms of the individual creativity survey score, and whether they were performing better or worse than average when looking at the organizational creativity survey score. So then you get 4 different groups. So if you're performing super well in both domains, you are in the upper right corner. If you're doing below average in both respects, you're in the lower left corner, and then you have the intermediate groups there as well. And our hypothesis was that if you are in the high corner, then you are more likely to do well in terms of your financial performance. And then you're in the low corner, then vice versa. And indeed, in this sample, this turned out to be true. So in the here you have the green circles depicting if the company is performing above the domain average or industry average in terms of EBITDA margin. So you have 5 out of 7 of those circles being green. So sort of the probability that you perform well in terms of profitability is 5 divided by 7 in that corner, whereas if you are in the lower left corner, then it's only 1 in 6. So this is a visual, I think it's kind of nice. It kind of gives you an indication that there might be something here. Of course, we have a small sample and we can't sort of prove causation based on this figure, but I think this is encouraging evidence about the potential that creativity has in terms of boosting your financial performance as well. And also this is something that is kind of in line with what the other approach has found as well. So if there is more of this creative potential and creative individuals, then financial performance also seems to be better. Next was a correlation analysis. So here we were looking at correlations between the different creativity categories and financial performance. And here we saw something interesting. The correlation between creative culture and this financial performance was actually much stronger than the correlation between individual creativity and financial performance. And people in the creativity field might not find this surprising at all, because I think this is something that has been sort of noted in the creativity literature, that it really does matter how the organization is supporting individuals' creativity. Because as Tuomas said, we are all creative people, so it's not about finding the creative genius, but sort of creating the conditions for us all to create. And finally, maybe this is the most technical one, so we'll stop here for a while. So this is the decision tree methodology. And basically, decision tree is a machine learning method, and here the purpose is to basically predict if you're going to end up in the overperforming box in terms of financial performance or the underperforming box. And then what the method does, it looks for the category that is the strongest predictor of whether you're going to be ending up in the overperformance or the underperformance box. And here, the first category is this leadership amplifier. So that was one of the categories in the organizational creativity survey, and this category turned out to be the most decisive factor. So if you're doing above the average score in this leadership amplifier category, then it's more likely that you're going to be ending up in the overperformance score when it comes to financial performance. But if you're doing below average, then it's more likely that you're going to be in the underperformance box. Other interesting things, even if you are sort of not doing that well in the leadership thing, it works like this, let me see. Even if you're not doing that well, so you end up in this branch, then if you have the creative genius, so the identity amplifier, which is an individual level creativity category, if that is very, very high, then you can still end up in the overperformance box based on this data. On the other hand, even if your leadership score is good, so you go into this branch, but then, the atmosphere is poor. So there are fights and no psychological safety, then you end up in the underperformance box. So now, of course, decision trees are kind of sensitive to the data that you have at hand. So maybe take these bold claims with a grain of salt. But anyway, with this bunch of companies and data that we had, then this is the result that we got. Whether these results are generalizable, then that's subject to another research. However, here are the key takeaways from this data-driven approach. We did find evidence that creativity is positively associated with financial profitability. And it's not only kind of this approach or this data-driven approach, but it's a combined conclusion from all of the methods that were used in this project. Also, creative culture, that matters more than having a bunch of creative individuals in your team. And this is also something that is supported by other literature as well. And finally, creativity promoting leadership, that is the most decisive factor in terms of predicting financial success. And again, repeating myself, but this is also something that was found by the other approaches and teams in the project as well. But I think this concludes my presentation, and I'm looking forward to your questions in the Q&A session. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Eeva, for the pioneering insights into the economic value of creativity. And I cannot help myself but to mention that next we will do a longitudinal study. So in this Creatively project, we had 5 companies and 2 societal partners. And then in the longitudinal study, the professors say that we need 30 companies involved in the project. So if you are interested in collaborating with us, please contact me, Tuomas, Astrid, Eeva, for example, and we can help you further. But then we will move on, and next we will hear Matti Kuittinen, Associate Professor of Sustainable Construction at the School of Arts, Design and Architecture. He opens up a radical change in creative activity that architecture and the construction industry need at the moment. The stage is yours, Matti.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm, as said, a professor of sustainable construction, but I'm also an architect, as you can see from my stereotypical clothing, if you didn't notice that already. I'll be talking about the planetary boundaries which are so essential context into which we should actually, in my view, put creativity. Because it's nice to be creative, but there are things that require very high level of creativity if we are about to make the world a livable place for the next generation. So that's my frame of reference. So as you have probably heard about the term planetary boundaries, let's have a short recap of what are the constituents of that. So on the other hand, we have something called an ecological ceiling. It's something that we mustn't trespass. We shouldn't go over the carrying capacity of our dear home planet, because after all, it's the only place where we can know that life such as ours can exist or potentially thrive in the known universe, which is pretty big. So on the outer rim, we have things that we shouldn't go over, and these are many. There are 9 different categories, starting from climate change, which is actually in a rather desperate state at the moment. Aalto has been sending professionals to climate conferences, and I've been there a couple of times as well. And it comes probably as a no surprise that still we are not able to limit the emissions. Emissions are growing every year, even though we have had Paris agreements and Kyoto protocols there for ages. So still emissions are going towards 2 degrees or 3 degrees at the moment. Then we have ozone acidification. Probably media has been telling us all that the oceans aren't doing that well and that corals are about to vanish. Then we have chemical pollution. There are hundreds of new chemical compounds coming to the markets every year, and we don't know how these act together with other pollutants that are already there in the built environment. Then the use of nitrogen and phosphorus, especially in agriculture, is pushing much beyond the planetary carrying capacity, and the same, unfortunately, is related to fresh water use. Then land conversion is another driver that is pushing us towards the tipping point. If I'd give you just one example, and that's about the use of new urban land area. As you know, we are going towards 10 or 11 billion new inhabitants by the end of the ongoing century. And this growth is happening mostly in cities. Well, then how much new cities do we need? If we figure out the land area that's going to be needed for new cities, it's on the equal amount of land area that today's Germany has, only times 4. So the needed new land area for new urban areas is 4 times the current land area of Germany by the end of the ongoing century. So these examples paint a picture of something that has to be changed. We have to change the narrative, which is mostly doom and gloom, and here we need creativity. Well, but then there is another side of the equation. It is the human need. It's something where we need to have fair and equitable and just future for the generations that are yet to come. All in all, this figure, as many of you might recognize, is called the donut economy. And the aim is not to go over the planetary carrying capacity while trying to provide the future generations with good life. And there in the middle, in the green zone, is where we should stay. There we should do the business, do the arts, do everything that we want to do to make our existence meaningful. The trick is, however, that as there are more people in the party wanting to have a piece of the pie, that green zone gets smaller and smaller and smaller per every new individual that wants to share that same lifestyle, which is mostly material and energy-based. And therefore, whatever we do, be it business or something else, we must do that with utmost care and sensitivity, because this is the only place where we can find suitable conditions for life. So Then I'm going to take another example, but this comes from my field of science and practice, which is construction. Currently, as the humanities headcount is growing, that means that we need to have more sustainable homes and schools and streets in between. Today, we are consuming half of annually extracted raw materials into construction. And because of the growing consumption patterns, actually the use of construction materials is growing faster than global population. Where do we take this stuff? We do not take that from the hardware store ultimately. We are actually taking that from the homes of our fellow neighbors, non-humans. Construction materials or any raw materials do not appear from a vacuum. It comes from somebody's home. And that's why the extraction of raw materials for our needs is actually a main contributor to biodiversity loss. According to United Nations, 90% of all biodiversity loss is associated to the extraction of raw materials. And construction is the key consumer in this regard. So then there is another thing which is invisible, that we have to use creativity to tackle it. And that is, of course, the climate change. Now we've gone beyond the 1.5 degree goal. We should try to stay below the 2 degree goal. And the thing is that thing up in the atmosphere, CO2. Just yesterday, I checked the latest readings from Hawaii. Actually, there is the observatory that's measuring CO2 in the atmosphere every day. Luckily, the current US administration hasn't yet shut it down. They have plans to do that, but luckily it's still up and running. It's a relief when I see it, but the figure is not a relief. Last time we had these sort of figures in the atmosphere, it was around 4 million years ago. And we can check from paleoclimatic data and reconstructions that how did our planet respond to these amounts of CO2 in the atmosphere? Because as we all know, CO2 is like the invisible warm blanket that's melting ice and snow. Well, last time, 4 million years ago, when we had similar figures of CO2 in the atmosphere, the planetary response was that sea levels were from 5 to 25 meters higher than they are today. That's not, of course, the end of humanity, but that's pretty much the end of our socio-economic systems or urban cultures, because most of that wealth is in the seashore. So a dramatic change has to happen. And I think that it would be intellectually very, very lazy if we pretended that, okay, the party can go on and we just do a little some fine-tuning or tweak our consumption patterns towards green growth or something like that. I think that we are inevitably in front of a radical change, whether we want it or not. So let's do art. Let's try to get away from these unpleasant facts and find refuge or find solutions in creativity and art. Actually, the thing that you are looking is not modern sculpture. This is modern construction product. And it's actually made by one of the leading engineering companies, Aalto, and it's actually one of the iterations for a new steel joint. On the left-hand side, you can see a typical welded steel joint. In the middle and on the right-hand side, you can see a 3D printed or laser sintered example, which consumes ultimately 70% less stuff, but still has the same load-bearing capacity. And this is a real project, actually. So is the future going to look 3D printed? And is this the ultimate level of creativity that we are going to start 3D printing fancy stuff? Well, probably in some solutions, but I would argue that this is a niche. Much more creative is to do something that's boring, yet supports good living standards. This is in Bordeaux, in France. And this project was actually avoiding demolition. You see there is a boring-looking building behind a new row of balconies. It's a very large social housing project, a rental housing, in which the living conditions were cramped and the people were very unhappy with this neighborhood. So the intervention was that instead of knocking the old buildings down and making new buildings and thereby consuming lots of new stuff, the intervention was to build a new row of balconies, and this was really a good intervention that improved the living quality of building who were living there. So the tenants liked this very much. It's perhaps not so exciting as those 3D printed joints that I showed you. But I would argue that this is not yet the ultimate level of creativity. This could be the ultimate level of creativity, or at least it's a very interesting interpretation of creativity. This is a park, again in Bordeaux, made by and designed by the same architectural office, Lacaton Vassal, and they were commissioned to redesign this square, this park. So they went there, they interviewed users, they interviewed people who were living there. What do you want? What's wrong here? What should be improved? And they came up with the proposal that, let's do nothing. It's okay. The only thing that they did two things. They cleaned and then they changed the light bulbs. And that's it. I don't know how they get paid for it not doing anything, but at least the city saved a lot of money and the planet saved a lot of resources. So I argue that creativity is sometimes not doing something, but leaving something undone. And that's what we should truly embrace. What can we leave undone if it's not dirty dishes? This sort of architecture used to be cool, but this is by no means cool. This is actually an example and a monument of overuse of resources. And these sort of examples that are for the elitistic needs of a minority with an excess amount of materials and resources are, in my view, something that should not be seen in the future. At least we should unlearn our that this isn't something that we would like to see in the future. This is uncool in a same manner that it's uncool to do anything from ivory nowadays. In a same manner that it's uncool to wear clothes that were done by children or forced labor. So instead of these sort of examples, we should really question that what is it to be a human? What is the essence of being a human on this planet at this point of time? Is the essence of humanity that we are a gigantic planetary scale extractor of resources for our pleasure, for non-humans' pain? A famous Finnish architect Alvar Aalto wrote that the ultimate goal of the architect is to create a paradise. And now we can think that we are, in a way, architects of our own life. And we can explore a little creativity of what sort of life do we want to design ourselves, at least in those aspects that are still in our control. And I would think that we would need to ask the question that whom does our creativity serve? Does it serve the people, or the profit, or the planet? And in Alvar Aalto's ideas, following his words, I would like to leave you with the thought or question, for whom would you create a paradise? Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Matti, for your thought-provoking presentation. What we create truly matters. I am now very sad to tell you that Reetta Andolin of Raisio couldn't join us today. Instead, I have promised to tell you a bit of our company collaboration on creativity. As you have heard today, we are quite convinced that sustainable breakthrough innovations are born from creativity and collaboration. In the changing world, it is important to constantly develop the skills of personnel. Today, it is paramount to ensure creativity in organizations on all levels, as we have heard today. Companies have wanted to gain an understanding of the creativity metrics for developing and growing their businesses on an industrial scale. Research, development, and innovation collaboration is at the heart of many growth strategies. Creativity increases innovation and especially the speed of innovation. Even Matti can maybe disagree with us on that. These are important areas for increasing competitiveness. In the long term, the benefits are assessed as new competitive advantage, such as intellectual property, rights and sales of new products. And as I mentioned earlier, we will do a longitudinal study next, and you are all welcome on board. Then I would like to ask all of the speakers again to the stage. And I think they deserve a big, big hand again for their presentations. Okay, what we have heard today. We started with Astrid. She brought up the mundane creativity we all deal with and made a big bridge to the creativity of organizations. Then Eeva presented the possibilities to measure creativity and moved on to the impact of creativity in companies. And finally, Matti explained how we need creativity for the sustainable future and what kind of an example he gave to us. Wow. We are now ready for your questions and comments. We have a couple of mics here in the auditorium. So please raise your hand and wait for your turn. Speak only with the mic, please, so that everybody can hear you online too. And our second request to you is that we ask you to present short and concise questions so we can have more time to take more of those. And then the participants online, you can send your questions through Presemo. Kanerva will help you by raising questions here in the auditorium for the speakers. And they will answer your questions and also maybe discuss on your comments. So who would like to start?
Hello, thanks a lot for really great, interesting, insightful presentations. I was wondering if the creative leader is the sort of main influencer of profitability. Is it our duty here in the School of Business to actually educate these creative leaders? And how would you do that? What do you need to educate creative leaders?
Thank you. It's an excellent question. Maybe I have to redirect it to Astrid, who is a professional in creativity.
Is this on? Is this, yeah, yes. It should be on. Okay, great. Thank you for the wonderful question. I think that definitely, I mean, leaders are in a key position when it comes to fostering creativity, inviting creativity in the organization, setting kind of the example by their own kind of ways of leading, inviting vulnerability, I think, openness, curiosity, so kind of that we sort of see the opportunities, we see the possibilities that we wouldn't otherwise see. So that is something that we want kind of to foster in all the employees in a way. And I think one of the problems in Finland, at least, is also that we lack we're not bold enough always, we're not brave enough. So also kind of as leaders, we might also want to encourage a bit more of a ambitious risk-taking in a way, so that we kind of bring out those ideas, even though they sound crazy or they are still half-baked, they're not finished, they're just seeds of kind of ideas that could be developed further, that could become an innovation. But I think it's important to change the culture in the sense that there is openness, there's trust, and there's trust in the employees. So leaders are excellent in setting the example, but then leadership as an activity is always kind of it's relational and collective. So I believe kind of in the collective capacity of the organization to be honest.
Would you like to elaborate, Eeva?
I think it was very well put. So like I say, I have to confess I'm not sort of a creativity professional at all, so more a mathematical modeler.
Oh, we heard you before. Then I think we have a question in Presemo. No?
Not yet.
Okay, not yet. So maybe the next one in the auditorium. Here, please.
So AI and creativity, does AI support or hinder creativity in your opinion?
Nice question. We actually did some work on that in the project as well. So there were tensions that were found, definitely. So there was some tensions related to, for instance, the sort of easiness of using AI. You can kind of have it generate stuff for you if you wish. But then on the other hand, you risk losing something or de-skilling. Your skills in kind of thinking by yourself or creating by yourself might deteriorate if you're not using AI in a good way. There were other tensions or paradoxes there as well that were found. So it's not kind of clear-cut how that's going to go. I would also kind of personally maybe argue that oftentimes creativity, as Astrid said, is something very human in us. So kind of outsourcing stuff that makes us human, like totally I would not maybe do that. And also related to sustainability concerns, we all know that kind of AI does require a lot of energy. And if we're already kind of struggling with some of our resources, then outsourcing tasks that are not necessary for the AI to do for us, I would kind of advise against that. I think when it comes to AI, we're still in the learning curve, so there are a lot of possibilities that we can't even imagine, the possibilities of how that could be used. And of course, there are some cases, like for instance, in detecting sort of diseases or cures for different kinds of diseases, there AI has proven to be very useful because just humans can't go through all the combinations that one might have. So in that sense, it helps in finding new creative solutions that are useful and sustainable. But do you have something to add?
Yeah, maybe from an architect's viewpoint, it's a very interesting question. That is my profession going extinct? Because anybody can create fancy images of buildings and then go to a construction company, make me one of these, please. But I would argue that actually creativity as a designer, that's not something that happens by a couple of clicks of mouse. It's a process that involves several stakeholders. So it doesn't happen in a vacuum or in a server. So regardless of how much you use AI as a tool, and I think it's a wonderful tool, still there has to be the process, and only through the process, I believe, we start to understand that what works in this or that design challenge. So it's not like coming with right answers. It's about asking the right questions and then getting committed by asking those questions into the possible solutions. So I think that AI is a very welcome addition to the toolbox, but it's not the end solution itself.
Thank you.
Thank you. And then the next one, and now Presemo, I think.
Yes, there is one question which goes like this. Many organizations say they value creativity, but their structures, incentives, and KPIs often discourage it. From your perspectives, what is the single most common organizational barrier that kills creativity, and what should leaders change first?
I think this goes to Astrid.
Thank you. Oh, the most difficult barrier. Well, at least the discourse is, what we hear from people is that there's never time and space to create, that we're so kind of in our own routine works or in the spiral of, team meetings piling up, that we don't have the time to create or time to think differently or to do something different. So maybe kind of addressing that as a starting point needs to be sort of, but again, there's research saying that we sort of, regardless of all of that, we can still find those pockets where we can sort of come up with things. So it's not clear cut once again, But I would kind of make sure that there are possibilities for interesting and meaningful encounters at work, so that there's, I mean, even though we work in a hybrid setting, that we meet each other physically every now and then, that we have good lunches together, that we foster good kind of relationship at work as friends, as colleagues, and make sure that there's possibility to really kind of exchange ideas on a regular basis. So that is one important thing. So making sure that there are spaces where we can do that. And of course, kind of resourcing is always an issue, but of course, I mean, economy is about wise resourcing. And what I learned while I did studies on artists and designers is really that they improvise. They're really good at making the best use of the limited resources available. So I think that is something that we also in the company setting need to think about. How do we wisely and sustainably use the resources we have at hand in order to create something interesting? And as leaders, kind of think about the resourcing, try to resource for creativity in this way, and make sure that your employees feel seen and heard. The element of really kind of building trust in them, making sure that they have the agency to create, and that they are somehow seen and rewarded for that. That would be important.
Thank you, Astrid. And then I think we are ready for the next question. Yes, back there.
Hi, my question goes to Eeva. When studying the various organizations, I'm curious to know whether you found big differences between them, or were they kind of all on the same level?
Thank you. There were big differences, and maybe some of the companies were surprised if some of them were not sort of working in industries that would be described as creative, and then they were kind of surprised that they scored so well when they saw their performance. So there were interesting surprises for I think many.
But in addition to that, I think atmosphere was really important. So the atmosphere in the culture was really kind of playing out in all of these kind of an important factor.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Can I just out of curiosity check that? Did you really have Vero as one of your? So
yes.
I started to think that what sort of creativity is needed in thinking that how am I taxed?
I think they've been super creative when it comes to their advertising and things like this. So they do have this creative culture. And when it came to Vero and Sitra, we of course didn't use profitability as a measure of a performance. So they were not included in that profit analysis. But then you could, like, for instance, when it comes to taxes, you can measure like how big of a portion of the taxes are they actually able to get, like the taxable income that you should be kind of getting the taxes to the authorities. And Finland is doing very well in that.
Okay, and then I thought in the middle, yes, please.
René Felber, I'm an independent advisor. My question relates to AI leadership as well. It's quite difficult for leaders nowadays to balance ambidexterity. So on one end, you need to scale. On the other end, you need to make sure that you create this sort of creativity, so the small plants. And how do you see this? How do you best balance this in an organizational context so that the leaders are looking at both exploitation and exploration?
Do you want to go? I mean, this is the difficult question, right? In practice, how do we balance? It's always a balancing act.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I think we had discussions about this. So maybe kind of keeping the sort of, because you need to kind of be profitable to be able to function as a company, but then you need to look at the long term. So maybe that's the sort of exploitation, exploration thing. So I think the successful recipe is to keep those both views in mind at all times, but sort of specific processes of how to do that that's I think a company-specific thing. So I'm sorry I don't have a silver bullet answer for that.
Would you like, Matti, to continue, maybe elaborate a little bit from your perspective as an architect?
Yeah, the use of AI as an architect. Yeah, and the companies. Well, of course, the adoption of AI in the companies is going to change the value chain a little bit. Maybe change the process times and maybe generate new ways of getting through processes. So that's there for certain. But I don't see that that's necessarily still going to change the majority of my sector, because AI can't hold a tool on the building side. AI, of course, can operate a robot, but there is still so much manual labor that needs to be out there, so that it's difficult to bypass HI or human intelligence by AI in that regard.
Thank you. And then the next one. Back there, I think 2 hands up.
Hi. I have a question about the happiness level of the individual and related to the creativity as well as the community belonging. So as the Aalto school, for students or for staff, have you had any practice on it, and how we can prove it?
So the question of improving the sort of the culture here at Aalto from a happiness perspective, did I kind of get the question right?
From the two perspectives, one is the happiness level perspective, one is the community belonging, because I think these two probably are related with the creativity.
Yes, I mean, what we can see is the sense of belonging is really crucial in terms of kind of fostering a culture where there is psychological safety and where people feel that they are, again, seen and heard. And being seen and heard is important, again, for getting sort of recognition for your ideas. And if somebody isn't sort of seeing or hearing them, then you don't feel that you belong. So definitely, I mean, these are linked, and in order to strengthen the community from this perspective, I think it's all about, making sure that, you foster that sense of belonging, that there is, activities that sort of bind people together, that there's the social glue somehow that is strengthened, and that there is this sense of community. And I think students are really good at that in building their own student clubs and being active in those and inviting friends and trying to sort of also kind of do lots of things outside of the studies. So that's one thing, I guess, but thank you.
And then the next one back there, please.
So you, as mentioned in the beginning of the speeches, is that creativity is everyone's privilege, and I'm interested in the study that you talked about, that in the companies you studied, is leading creativity also like cutting through the whole company, not just knowledge workers, but also those doing manual work, like in companies like Raisio, like in the factories. And so I was interested in this, that is it visible that if it's the strength, that it actually does cut through everyone and it's everyone's privilege?
Maybe Astrid, you can tell about the Posti.
Yes, so my fantastic team did also ethnographic fieldwork at Posti at the logistics center, which is often kind of not seen as a very creative place, but there was enormous also kind of aesthetic knowledge and creativity in the workers that has developed over the years. So they can operate these machines because they know how they work, and if they fall apart, they have the solutions directly. So there's enormous capacity that is really kind of part of that setting that is normally really kind of not included in these studies on knowledge workers or kind of creativity focusing on a specific group, so to speak. So yes, there was this appreciation for that craft, and I think you're into something very important here, that we need to see that as well, and we need to kind of recognize the value of that and make sure that that is also kind of, that is really seen, and all the ideas that are in these workers, for instance, in logistics centers, they might have fantastic ideas that we need to somehow also listen into.
Thank you. And then the next one, please.
I have two questions, one for basically cross-cutting for each of the panelists, and one for Matti specifically. Maybe I go with Matti first and ask, why a paradise, Matti? And of course, we know that Alvar Aalto said this, and it becomes canon, of course, because he said it. But why a paradise? What is the question to which a paradise is the answer?
That's something that we would need to ask from Alvar Aalto. What did he mean? What did he mean? I use that metaphorically. And the intention of this metaphor in my usage was that design should always try to change things for the better. And the question is that if you are trying to change things for the better, then there should be a beneficiary. And who is that beneficiary? Is that a shareholder in a company? Is that a marginalized people, a group somewhere? Is that a non-human somewhere? Or who is that somebody? And I think this is an essential question. When we are trying to do some good actions, then we should have a broad and holistic view. And I would very much like to underline that mostly our actions seem to be human-based, and sort of like introducing this aspect of non-humans and their well-being, because after all, they can't post their opinions on X or some other social media. So who should speak for them?
And could I then ask a follow-up question to this? And of course, we know that all the creativity is Anthropocenic creativity, right? We want us to benefit ourselves, which I think, in the way that you call them non-humans already, right? In like, there is a power relationship already there. Instead of calling us non-animals, we call them non-humans. And there's already, like, we know then who is in charge and who's present. But then, like, I found your presentation really inspiring, because it made me think, what kind of creativity do we really need, and what kind of creativity do we really get? And there's a huge gap, as you can see in the questions that were asked. It was all about, how do I become more productive? How my organization increases my EBITDA? The questions that we must ask of what creativity is really good for, we do not ask. Most of the times, there's a huge gap between what we really need and what we think creativity is good for, right? And sort of you were really like pushing the nail on the head with your comments there. I wanted to ask you, the follow-up question was, how did you feel when you saw, let's say, creativity is good for increasing EBITDA, or creativity is good for increasing sort of satisfaction, but what about the planetary boundaries?
Thank you. Again, very, very big question. Would you like to, Astrid, start?
Yes, I think that what we need to think about is definitely the question of what is it that we create and why. So we don't need more stuff in the world that is kind of polluting and just, destroying the planet, to be honest. That we don't need. We need creativity that serves a better purpose. So we need solutions, processes, innovations that do something more, that do good. So I would like to see a combination of doing good in terms of serving business and being profitable and good business, but at the same time taking sustainability issues very seriously and thinking about the issue of how do we serve our planet at the same time. And there's a huge interest in social innovations nowadays. That's a big discussion. So kind of also thinking about the societal aspects of what we create.
Okay, Eeva, would you like to continue?
Yes, of course, I agree. I mean, who wouldn't? That we need to think about who we are creating for and sort of what values are we pursuing when doing anything, and who are the stakeholders, humans or non-humans, that are impacted by what we do. So I think sort of creativity as Matti also said, it's also about coming up with options that can be related to not doing something. So that's a creative process in itself, as you very, very nicely put it. But of course, you have to have the objectives of like why you are doing something when you are thinking about these creative options.
And then Matti.
Yeah, I think that one area where creativity would be most welcome is that how can it support us from changing what we want? Behavioral change. Can there be a better option that not only changes our sort of like immediate environment and surroundings and the things that we operate with, but what we actually aspire? I think this is something that we truly need, because it's sort of like a simple logic that there can't be profitable business on a broken planet. Of course, there can be some sort of business, but that's sort of like the dystopic imaginary that we can see from Hollywood movies, and nobody wants to see that. So how can we use creativity for settling for less, being happier, being satisfied with less material possessions? And of course, this is something that is very hard to put into the laws of business that govern today's companies. But I think Naomi Klein once wrote that it's for most. She was speaking about Americans, that for most Americans it's easier to figure out that how would the end of the world look like. But it's not as easy to figure out that how would end of capitalism look like. Because there is no Hollywood movie about end of capitalism, but there are tens of movies about the end of the world.
Okay, I think we have still room for questions and comments. And then again, Presemo, please.
Yes, many Aalto Arts students graduate into a reality where they're expected to turn creativity into viable business, but structured business support for creative careers is often weak or fragmented. As professors in Aalto, how do you see education and business ecosystems could support these creative career paths?
Now, I'm sorry, the speakers. I think this question goes to Tuomas.
That's good.
We are all ears, Tuomas.
Yeah.
Let us know.
Well, first of all, let me start with a little bit of statistics. Out of business school and technical school graduates, about 4 to 5% are entrepreneurs after 1 year after graduation. For the School of Arts, Design and Architecture, that figure is about 20%. So a lot of our students actually enter the workforce as sole entrepreneurs with their own office or company. It may not be a startup in the sense of that we think of startups as growing fast, but that's the way of making a living after you graduate from the School of Arts, Design and Architecture. And if the question was that how do we actually help people prepare for that, we actually got a great donation from Rafaela Seppälä a few years ago, and we started a process called Artpreneurship, meaning exactly that how do you build a company, a living, a livelihood out of your own artistic or design capabilities, and we are making progress in that. And my commitment to this is that by the time I retire as the dean, which will be in 3 years' time, there will be a mandatory course for all arts students in artpreneurship, so that they need to take that before they graduate.
Thank you, Tuomas. So we are really good on the way, and then we have a couple of secrets that we cannot announce tonight for you, but we are coming. Okay, and then back there, please, do we have the mic?
Thank you for the presentations, and it's very interesting and very important topic. As Tuomas and Timo, both of you in the introduction kind of part, you mentioned about growth, which is very much needed for us, for Finland. I'm just wondering, I mean, especially now from the academia perspective, knowing creativity and growth work hand in hand, from your perspective, how Finland is currently doing in terms of creativity as a society, as a country. Are we stagnating because of lack of creativity or the environment fostering creativity? And how can we do better to take the radical creativity leap in this country? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we take a round again.
Yeah.
Astrid, maybe you want to start.
Thank you. That's a key question. That's a very important question. And I do think that we have extremely high knowledge in Finland. We have experts, we have fantastic knowing. So we are really, really good at what we do. And luckily we see that the industry is now also kind of doing a bit better already. But I think that what we lack is a bit of an attitude of the boldness and the braveness that kind of neighboring countries are better at, for instance. Maybe we're not as sort of good as many others in getting out there to the market. So there's something in the attitude of kind of being a bit more bold, being a bit more brave, and maybe also not fine-tuning and kind of ideating the projects or products too long, accept that they're never gonna be perfect and just reach out to the market a bit faster.
Yeah, I think what we found in the project was along those lines. So there is some sort of lack in risk tolerance, maybe in many companies, which is oftentimes needed for truly radically creative ideas.
I would like to suggest that we would reconsider the creativity's time frame for what are we using creativity for. And of course we have the immediate need. We have the demographic situation and we have the geopolitical turmoil and whatnot. But I would like to suggest that what if we took a long-termist view and used creativity for seeing that what would be good for this country and this corner of the world for the next 200 or 300 years. How would that change our perspective if we acted like if we cared about the 4th and 5th generation after us? I think that would be responsible creativity. And then I would also like to, I feel like because I'm not from the business environment, I feel like I'm the guy who is asking silly questions, and sometimes that can be creative. So my silly question to your very smart intervention would be that, of course, because you linked growth and Finland's needs. So, and I would like to ask that, are there any steps in between? For what is the question for which growth is the answer? Is the question that we need well-being for the aging population? Is it that we need money for fulfilling some societal needs? Growth can be one answer. What are the other answers?
Wow, thank you. I think again a big hand to our speakers. All good things come to an end in time, just like this seminar as well. And then we will give stage to Timo. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was a fascinating program. I could have listened a while longer, but my usual job is to invite all of those here on site for continued discussions over refreshments. So thank you.